Hi, I'm Kat Rosenfield.
And I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and together we are Feminine Chaos. Today we are going to start by discussing a really fantastic article by Kat in Tablet about some recent series on Radiolab about, well, female sexuality, or perhaps denying the existence thereof. Kat, take it away.
Something a little bit like that. So Radiolab ran a series called In the Know that was very focused on...
And in the know, N-O.
And yes, right, good point. N-O, no. Very focused on the contemporary discussion surrounding sexual consent. And the first episode was by producer Caitlin Prest, who basically used it as an opportunity to kind of reckon with this very personal experience she'd had. She, has a lot of personal issues, I guess, sort of surrounding the question of consent and how it applies to her own life, and also how it applies to the feminine experience generally. That was part one, which included a dramatization, an audio dramatization of her having a bad hookup with her friend. Sure. I don't mean to laugh. It was something. It was interesting. And then part two focused on the experience of men who have, college-age men who have been accused of assault and found guilty of sexual misconduct and expelled from school, often in cases that aren't particularly straightforward, where it's not really clear that justice was served. And it included a interview with this woman, Hannah Stotland, who is an educational consultant who helps these guys reapply to school after they've been expelled, and sort of helps them strategize how to, address this blemish on their records. Often it can be very difficult for guys who've been expelled for sexual misconduct to actually get back into school anywhere else. So the article that I wrote for Tablet focused on both, but more on the second part, and tried to just address how we have developed this concept of affirmative consent that's supposed to be a solution. Oh, here comes Rasputin. It's supposed to be a solution to the problem of sexual assault on campus, and to the problem of sexual miscommunication generally, but how the actual way that it's worked out is to sort of just force women into a very passive role, to sort of eliminate the possibility that they might have desires themselves, that they might want to be active architects of their own sexual encounters. And I feel like I've talked for an awful long time about this.
Oh, no, go on. I mean, I think that this whole question of the sort of sexuality on campus specifically is an interesting one, because I think there definitely was a need for something to change from how it used to go, where it used to be that if bad things happened on campuses, which they did in my day as well, what would happen is typically the woman, the girl, whatever, would go to like a dean or something, and the dean would take it all very seriously, but then not do anything because, the guy is also a student, is also paying tuition. They don't want to get the school in the news for something embarrassing. It gets kind of brushed aside, even if there's real stuff going on. And that wasn't great. Now, one might think, okay, so maybe the answer is to take this whole thing away from schools entirely and have it just be perhaps, that women go to the cops, which has its own problems, or deal with it in some other way, which every way would have its own problems. But instead, what seems to have happened is there's this direction of hyper-focusing on what happens on campuses to the exclusion of the rest of society. And yes, this notion of needing a whole new script for sexuality with affirmative consent, which whether or not, I think I'm just too old to know, but just this notion of somebody asking, like, the script seems a little strange to me. And I don't know if maybe it doesn't seem strange to 20-year-olds, but to me it would sound all very stilted and kind of odd.
Yeah, it strikes me as an overcorrection, and one that does not actually solve the problem that it was supposed to address. And it's interesting because when yes means yes first kind of emerged, when that idea first emerged on the landscape, I was really enthusiastic about it. As a teen advice columnist especially, I was like, this is so good. It's going to provide girls with a new framework for considering their own role in their sex lives. That, you know, they're going to stop imagining themselves just as gatekeepers, where their sole responsibility is, you know, the only time that they speak up is to put the brakes on if a guy is, you know, is pushing boundaries, and instead to imagine themselves as enthusiastic participants, to consider their wants and their needs and to start articulating them. I really envisioned it as a means for women to take a more active role in, you know, in directing their own sexual encounters and their sexual lives. And then affirmative consent standards came about and the opposite happened. If anything, I think that they've served to push women even more into this corner where they're expected to be passive. And where it's not even now that they're expected to say no, but they're supposed to wait to be asked to say yes.
Mm-hmm. It still has consent in there, and it seems like nothing has been challenged about the notion. And if anything, and this is where I think that the Caitlin Prest's remark, we'll talk about this in that second episode. Well, I'll just say now, she says something about that basically you should assume that you can't know that a woman has consented, even if she has consented. You should always sort of assume, because of structural sexism, it's always the woman, it's always the man in the position of privilege. Therefore, can you ever really know that a woman wants anything? Like, or can a woman herself even ever know? Right? Something like that?
Yeah. How can, you know, if you've always been socialized to please others, how can you really know what you want? Yeah. And I mean, I have qualms with that for, you know, a number of reasons, but
let's go into those, because I do too. Yes.
Yeah. So one big thing that I think, to use a phrase I hate, deserves to be interrogated, is this idea
it'll come up later.
Okay, that's
the
right.
Handbag interrogation, but go on.
Right. This idea that socialization is destiny, which just doesn't ring true to me and doesn't seem to apply in any other realm. You know, we're constantly telling people that they are responsible for asserting themselves, even if they've been socialized to defer to others, that it's no excuse as an adult for being a doormat, basically. And I think for you know, a number of reasons, and maybe understandably, people want to imagine that sex is different in that way, and want to apply different rules. But I don't know. I do think that it would be nice to get to a place where women could say that, you know, that having been socialized to please does not mean that they have to please, that they have to, you know, always consider their partner's desires before their own. And to acknowledge that in this day and age, you don't really risk a great deal simply by asserting yourself, by saying no to something that you don't want, or by articulating what you do want in the sexual realm.
Well, I wondered a bunch of things about this, and I'll try to figure out how to list them all in a way that doesn't take 20 consecutive hours. But first off, it seems like there's a dynamic that got described in this, especially in, I guess, in the first two of these Radiolab episodes, where a young woman is alone with a man and feels, and not a man she's in a relationship with, not a man she particularly cares to have any great future with necessarily, but she just feels, because he's a man, because he's the man, she's the woman, that she just has to do certain acts. Because, not that he's pressuring her, not that he certainly not that he's assaulting her and anything like that, but that she feels simply that she must defer and do these things. And to me, it seems that that dynamic just seems not something I've never heard of, but hardly, how to put this, hardly universal among even young women. And it seems like the possibility of getting together with a man and just making out, or not even if you don't, doesn't seem to really like, and I guess then I wonder, what is it that's preventing that from just happening? And then I wonder, well, maybe in some of these cases, these are women who do actually want to have sex at that moment, but then whether it's regret, whether it's society still stigmatizing women for wanting that. I mean, what was so interesting, and perhaps I'm going to just say maybe not representative, but what was interesting about the stories from the series is that they did involve consensual acts redefined as non-consensual after the fact, which
yes,
I am going to just say I doubt is typical, but like of cases that come up. But these particular ones, it just seemed like women took their initiative, let's say, more than consented in one case, at least, like started an act.
Initiated oral sex. Yeah, I think we need to be specific
about
that.
That's true. I was trying to be like all dainty about it. No. So basically, yeah, if a woman initiates oral sex and then this gets sort of redefined as because men want that sort of thing, it seems very different from if a man had ordered her to do, or somehow demand, it seems like maybe she wanted to do that, and maybe her thoughts afterwards. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that was part of it. So I think it is this question of it's still being stigmatized for women to either want sex or to want sex from men who turn out not to like them that much. I think that's also something that might be going on, that when these things don't turn into a relationship, it becomes somehow still, even in these times, embarrassing sometimes for a woman. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I found the whole thing. Well, then there's this question of the educational consultant, Hannah Stotland, right? Or Hannah
Scotland.
Or
Hannah Stotland.
Hannah Stotland. And that I found fascinating for a couple reasons. One was that she says that she advised, so her job, first of all, is a fascinating, that this exists as a job. She's not, you think educational consultant, you think, oh, maybe she's like writing rich kids' college applications. No, she is there. Her job is getting these guys who've been expelled from college back into college, who've been expelled from college because of sexual misconduct findings, right? Mm-hmm. And so one thing that I found really strange and striking was that she tells them, even if they are, even in the cases where they haven't done anything wrong, and you have to infer that there are cases where they have done things wrong. So that's a little bit, I think that needs to be mentioned. But even in the cases where they haven't done anything wrong, they need to, in their package, their application package, they need to convey that they've learned and that they have done things wrong. And that just seems very weird to me.
Right. It's like you have to confess, acknowledge your sin, basically. Because there's no, well, I shouldn't say there's no room, but there seems to be increasingly little room within this conversation for a guy to say, I've been falsely accused, I didn't do this, and for that to be a defense in and of itself. There's still, Prest kind of addresses this too, that what we're pushing back against all of a sudden is not just the individual bad acts or acts of an individual person, but that she wants men to reckon with their role as like sort of representatives of the patriarchy and as historical oppressors.
Yes.
That seems to be sort of entering in, I think, to maybe somewhat into the reapplication process where, it's simply you don't represent only yourself. It's simply not enough.
Well, it just seems strange to me because it seemed like on the one hand, I felt like the second episode kind of skipped over the very real existence of men who have in fact done things wrong, because of the whole thing. And these two episodes seem to focus on these weird cases where men really, like in sort of absurd ways, haven't done anything wrong, but are made to kind of.
Well, the stated focus was these gray areas. So,
but it just, I feel like you need the bigger picture context, or why is this even coming up? You know what I mean? Like, I think it's not that it's only gray areas. There are also, you know, actual assaults happening on campuses where it wouldn't be such a gray area, you know? I guess I didn't like the idea though, that somebody who hasn't done anything wrong would have to, and this may be strategically true, that they would have to sort of claim that they had, because it just seems like then you have something on your record where you've said that you're like a little bit rapey, even if you know what I mean? It just seemed very strange. It's like,
true. But of course, you know, having the misconduct on your record is already so damning.
Right.
That, you know, it really is,
right.
I think, about a strategic thing. But to return just for a second to the question of you know, these gray areas, and I guess maybe why we discuss them so much is because the affirmative consent movement, such as it is, has really made these encounters much more fraught, and basically kind of established this black and white way of thinking about them that doesn't really allow for the kind of ambiguity that I think maybe people used to be much more comfortable with, rather, when it came to sexual encounters between inexperienced people who aren't necessarily sure what they want. By framing everything in terms of consent now, you have you know, people being told that one misread cue, one misplaced touch, one, you know, ill-timed kiss, not just makes them a rapist or guilty of sexual assault, you know, if they didn't get explicit consent for it beforehand, but also that they have been raped or that they've been victimized. And so I think it kind of encourages this extreme response in the aftermath. There's no room now to say, all right, this one went badly. This didn't go as I hoped. So I'm going to reckon with that, and I'm going to do things differently next time. There's very little room now to acknowledge that you can be unhappy and legitimately unhappy without having been wronged.
I think that's right. I think that's well put. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it, that basically there isn't really, rather than bringing in gray areas to further add nuance, to explain how, you know, humans actually interact, and to explain that things can go wrong in ways that do relate kind of to systems, but are also just very specific, whatever. It seems like it's almost impossible to articulate having been disappointed by an interaction without bringing these systems into it, and without bringing consent into it. And it seems like the squicky feeling after something went poorly, I mean, I can't imagine thinking about that as like in terms of consent if it wasn't really a consent issue. You know, I think these things should be separated because they're just such different questions, you know, like maybe it wasn't, you know, like maybe this wasn't the right guy to sleep with at that moment, you know, maybe it would have been good to know him a little better. Maybe he would have been one to just shake hands, you know. No, it just seems like it seems like it makes it harder to discuss where things go wrong, and indeed even where they go wrong in some way that has to do with sexism or something in some abstract way, because, well, it constantly, for me, it comes back to that modern love that we discussed, that modern love column, where a woman felt that her consent had somehow been violated because a guy ghosted her. And it's like, no, being dumped is not a violation
Yeah, I addressed this a little bit in the column too.
Yeah,
That
I mean, I think that's always,
there's this retroactive thing of saying, well, I didn't consent to having my feelings hurt, hence I didn't consent to any of what happened, any of what I did. And that's, I mean, it's simply not a functional way or a tenable way to approach relationships.
No, and I think it also ultimately isn't good for, and I think your piece really gets at this well, it isn't good for feminism, for just sort of women actually getting enjoyment out of not just like sexual acts, but just like, sometimes you take risks. Maybe you go out with a guy and you're not sure that he's madly in love with you, and you see, or whatever it is. And it just seems like this, if everything, I don't know, it just seems to be basically mixing up actual feelings of not being safe in certain situations with the inherent lack of safety in any interaction you have with somebody you don't yet have a committed relationship with.
Yeah. And leaning on that idea of safety and trying to contextualize it historically, and Presta did this in her segment, which I found a little bit, I don't know, maybe even offensive. She said, this is how women survive, by agreeing to sex that they don't really want. And, for somebody who is living in 2018, who's a member of a relatively privileged class, who's educated, who's engaging in consensual relationships as an adult, I don't think that that's a particularly useful way to address your sex life. And what it does offer, obviously, is a chance to kind of squirm out from underneath the weight of the responsibility that you may feel if you've done something and you're disappointed in yourself, or you've done something you feel ambivalent about. To contextualize it as well, this wasn't really my decision, or I really had no choice because patriarchy. But this kind of gets at something that we frequently discuss here, which is that trying to impose this sort of like oppressor-oppressed historical privilege framework on your interpersonal relationships tends not to go super well.
Exactly. And so that's why Kat's article reminded me of another, well, not reminded me of in the sense of they're similar articles, but it brought to mind another article that has come out recently by Wednesday Martin, who's the author who you may have heard of because she wrote a different book like a few years ago, I guess, about where a woman from the West Village, one posh part of Manhattan, moved to the Upper East Side, a different posh part of Manhattan, and claimed that she was sort of studying it as a kind of anthropologist, and that there were these wife bonuses that men would pay their wives. Turned out there weren't wife bonuses. Anyway, now she has a new book about female sexuality, and she wrote this op-ed that was kind of like, and I have done this myself, where you write a book, you write these op-eds to kind of promote the book. But it was this very strange op-ed that was tied in with the midterm elections, okay? Where she was saying that women should go on a sex strike before the midterm elections. Now, this article appeared on CNN.com on November 2nd. And so the sex strike that she was proposing was not a particularly long one. But also, what was funny about it was that she was talking about that it should be a strike where women don't have service sex, by which she means sort of relationship maintenance sex. Like a man is more up for it, a woman just kind of goes along with it, like within the context of a relationship. And she was saying not just that women shouldn't do this because women should be more actively, which, and that I would have agreed with, that women should have, feel able to pursue their desires sort of actively, but also that it had to do with the midterm elections and structural sexism, and that basically what you do privately needs to be sort of you need to think of these bigger political contexts while deciding these. And it just seemed, it's not how people operate, and it just seems like it's not how people should operate. And it just, yeah, it seemed, but I feel like there is this kind of move towards trying to force these things to be, to see them as related. And like, you know, even women who you know have husbands saying on Twitter, ban men, or, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. So I think, I think interpersonal interactions put into a privileged framework. I mean, this is, in a sense, like, that's a very modern way of putting it, but this has been, you know, there were feminists saying that heterosexual relationships are inherently bad. This is like a long-standing view.
That is true. Political lesbianism and
exactly. I mean, that's not new. It's never been universal among feminists, certainly, but it has been around as a view for some time. And I guess this is just kind of a new incarnation of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it didn't, obviously didn't catch on particularly back then. No. And now I think it's unlikely to catch on in that expecting that there seems to be this expectation, not just that women are going to get on board, but that men are going to, pause as they're involved and be like, well, I'm not acting just, in my own interests here. I'm also need to consider that I am, in fact, representative of all oppressive men who came before me.
Oh boy,
it's a lot to ask, particularly of a 25-year-old with his pants around his ankles. So
yeah, or even the 20-year-old who hasn't yet studied all of this, which, as apparently all college students take gender studies, although we didn't. But
right, that's true. We know not whereof we speak.
No. So, do you have any other thoughts on the on this?
No, I don't. I think okay. I think we covered it.
So I think it might be time to segue into the topic of where we switch as we usually do from the discussion of where women are represented as the ultimate victims to now we are going to talk about women as ultimate oppressors, but not all women. White women, all white women, or just privileged white women, and by what standard privileged? Well, that's what we're going to talk about now. So I'm fascinated to no end by this review that it's a book review that I first was really sort of nodding along and liking, and then kind of took a turn where I thought, wait a second, what is this about? So it's a review on BuzzFeed from a few days ago by Laura Turner of a self-help book called Girl, Wash Your Face. The book is by an author named Rachel Hollis, and Rachel Hollis, I guess, has a lifestyle brand and various sort of businesses around this. But this is apparently a really, really best-selling book. Somebody was just telling me on Twitter that when this author appeared in Toronto, which is where I live, this was like this huge fan base, like surfaces. So this is like some incredibly popular author. And the review started out as a kind of not earth-shattering, but still I think these are important and at least amusing points to make about how in the reviewer's opinion, this fits in this genre of what she calls, and I'm quoting, curated imperfection, where a woman who's kind of like a lifestyle blogger, influencer type is like, but I'm not perfect, like there's a little bit of mess over here, or like I had an extra cookie today, you know what I mean? Something like this sort of where it's not actually terrible things going on, but it's sort of just enough to seem relatable. That's always what it is, on social media especially. And, it was about this, and it seemed to sort of put this Rachel Hollis kind of in the same category as somebody like maybe like Ivanka Trump minus the Trump bit, but also I was thinking of, and I should admit that I have not only written about this, but just read it in my spare time, like Cupcakes and Cashmere or something like this, where there are these lifestyle blogs where a sort of photogenic, young, but not like incredibly young, generally woman will sort of write about her life and have pictures and such. But then the review takes this sort of other, so this book is self-help, right? This girl wash your face. And the gist of the review is kind of like, well, is this really the right thing to have a self-help book, almost, for a couple reasons? I guess it's basically like, in a sense, it's just, do these women who the book is directed to even need any help? So then I'm just going to quote, I'm quoting from the review now. Okay, this is not me, the review. But in what many people would consider to be a moment of full-blown cultural crisis in the United States, are white middle-class women the people who most need a champion telling them to prioritize themselves above all others? Again, I just quoted this. I quoted this. So the question is, I mean, I read this and I thought, okay, is the book saying, is the mere existence of a self-help book aimed at middle-class white women implying that those are the people who most need help at this point? Could it just be that this is a group of people who are the audience for this self-help book, and that there are indeed people who have it worse, and that the book is not claiming there aren't? I should say I have not read this self-help book. So that struck me a lot about this. And it also struck me just in terms of sort of relating it to our first topic, that we're again in this sort of dichotomy, right, where like either the young middle-class woman who has had a bad encounter in college is the ultimate victim, or we're in this situation where a book urging not specifically white middle-class women, but that's apparently who the audience is for this, like, don't those ladies have enough, right? So it seems like there's these two possibilities and not really any sort of middle ground where maybe they have more than some, maybe not quite enough.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that to position this as a question of, you know, are these the people who really need help, is not the correct framing. The question is, are these people who will purchase a self-help book? And yes, they are, you know, obviously.
Evidently.
Like, this thing is a massive #1 New York Times best-selling, been on the list for an awfully long time, you know, success. So I don't know. And I mean, I always think it's a little bit weird when a product is being created for consumption, and then this sort of moral framework comes in, where it's like, well, but, you know, do they really need this? Where it's capitalism. It doesn't matter if they need it, you know, they want it and they're going to buy it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that was part of what started to throw me off, because it's like, I think there have been, and I'm thinking of like Helene Olin's work and Ruth Whitman, a couple writers who've really sort of taken apart aspects of self-help, and where self-help is sort of promising to get people out of poverty or to bring about happiness, when in cases where there really are structural issues at stake, and self-help kind of comes in as a substitute for those. And I think that that's a fair critique. I think it's also one that's at this point been made quite a bit. And I don't know whether this particular review, like, it just seemed to kind of overshoot the mark in that regard, and kept invoking every different possible marginalized group and saying like, and okay, I need to find where I quoted this, but okay, can you tell, this is again a quote, can you tell a woman who has lost or hoped for a child as a result of state officials turning a blind eye to a water poisoning crisis in a predominantly Black area, or a mother seeking asylum whose child was taken away from her at the border, that, quote, you are ultimately responsible for who you become and how happy you are? You can, but you would be wrong and cruel. So then I'm thinking, well, no, that's true. That would be wrong and cruel, but is this self-help book claiming to do that? Or is it just kind of a product along the lines of, you know, high-end yoga pants that's never even claiming to be, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems maybe that, you know, no, this book is not going to achieve social justice, but is it claiming is going to. And it seems like to fault it for not doing that is to kind of miss what it is.
Yeah.
And to hold it accountable for something that just doesn't quite seem appropriate.
Well, it struck me, and maybe you can, address this a little bit, because I think you had some interesting things to say about it, that this did start out as a book review, and it was interesting, but it sort of turned into a review of Rachel Hollis herself.
Oh, yes. Oh, boy. Okay. Oh, so there's this parenthetical, which gets at this other sort of, the elephant in the room topic, which is kind of who is the either Rachel Hollis herself or the sort of presumed audience for this book. And if indeed this is a privileged woman, privileged in what sense and to what degree? So we have this parenthetical in the review that's Hollis had a difficult family upbringing. She calls it traumatic. Okay, the bunny ears.
Those air quotes. Oh my God.
Okay, I mean, I guess maybe she really says traumatic somewhere and is being quoted, but anyway, and was just 14 years old when she found her older brother, Ryan, after he had killed himself. Okay, this is not only in quotes, what I just read, this is in parentheses, what I'm telling you. This is a part of her article where she has this kind of, where Laura Turner, the reviewer, has this kind of aside about the privileged white lady who wrote this self-help book, claims she had a difficult, it's like, that sounds like she did have actually a really difficult childhood.
Yeah, that does sound traumatic.
And it just, that part, it's just, like I kept looking at this and thinking, it does seem like she overcame something, and this doesn't seem like, she's imagining it or other people are imagining. It seems, no, this seems actually like she grew up poor and had a very specific trauma in her childhood that seems, and it just seemed like, and then I guess that this just connected for me to this bigger question in the review about the sort of the white lady reader, where the reviewer herself sort of situates herself in the same cultural, like socioeconomic and racial group by pointing out that she herself belongs to some expensive co-working space in San Francisco where she lives because of her husband's tech job. And to me, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking these are like two totally different socioeconomic groups. While they may be married white ladies in America, this is like very different. Because she, at one point, the reviewer talks about the sort of privilege of being able to go back to college once you've had kids. And not all women can do this. And no, not all women can do this, but to suggest that going back to college, like for your undergrad degree as an adult, is like the epitome of privilege seems very strange.
Yeah, having not finished it to begin with, that's something that affects a particular group of people. And it was interesting, mentioning this co-working space. It seems pretty clear to me, at least, that the author of this review is substantially more privileged and better off, and I guess would be considered like super upper elite coastal class, as compared with not just the author herself, but definitely compared with the people who are reading this book.
Yes, this seemed to be it. And that's where I'm going to do something very insufferable, and I'm going to quote something I tweeted myself. Okay. So I said that I thought that the review feels like a socioeconomic punch down, posing as a punch up on behalf of the genuinely downtrodden. And I feel like that is just this kind of style of writing, genre, something where, especially in sort of lifestyle writing, where tastes that are like a woman with kind of like basic, would be sometimes called tastes, or something like this, where it's sort of socially unacceptable to mock that which is tacky, or that which is somebody who's posh finds tacky. So instead of saying, oh, look at these tacky people liking this cheesy self-help book, it's like, but think about the really poor people. Think about the really suffering people. Have you thought about them? And it's like, is it really about the really suffering people? Or is this kind of like a way of mocking something that frankly isn't of interest to somebody who's in a co-working space in San Francisco to begin with,
Yes.
And that's where it seems a little bit like it's this, that's what I mean by kind of like a punch down posing as a punch up on behalf of these, you know, refugee mothers getting evoked for, like, they had nothing. What does this have to, how is insulting the self-help book helpful to refugee mothers? Like, that's what I couldn't figure out.
I don't think it is.
I mean, but that's, so I guess it just seemed like it's very much about taste and about the current social unacceptability of, and I think rightfully so, I don't think it should be socially acceptable, of saying, oh, that's cheesy, tacky, something like that. So there's this line that really struck me in the review about, so I guess this author wrote about when she had made some money in some aspect of her lifestyle brand, whatever, that she went and got a Louis Vuitton handbag. And the line from the review that I'm obsessed with is, Hollis makes no attempt to interrogate her desire for an expensive designer bag.
Oh boy.
And I just had a lot of thoughts about this, because it seems sort of like, is the problem that the bag purchase is too fancy and thus privilege, or is the problem that she didn't get an obscure handbag from some sort of discreet, label-free designer that's popular, you know, in the right parts of San Francisco, Brooklyn, whatever.
And that costs 3 times as much.
Yeah, you know, and it just seemed like is the problem that it's just, like, I feel like there's this sort of repressed desire to say, oh, that's tacky, that gets asserted now these days as this, like, but it's actually, you know, like this solemn thing. And, or that like she doesn't have the cultural capital, that the book's author doesn't have the cultural capital to know that you're supposed to not get that particular bag, or feel a little bad about it, be a little ashamed of it, or like, oh, I've had this for years, oh, somebody gave it to me, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that this is really a way of mocking not just things for being tacky, but things that a particular type of white woman likes. It's, you know, it's the kind of Midwestern sensibility. It's like the kind of woman who, you know, maybe lives in a red state and works in marketing, and there's this divide in terms of, like, you know, what you're I'm trying to think how to put this, like, what signifies success to you, that you go and you buy a Louis Vuitton handbag and that's seen as, you know, yeah, basic and tacky and, you know, so 2010.
Yeah.
I say this as somebody who doesn't own any designer handbags, so, you know, I may be misunderstanding something essential about this aspect of the conversation.
I mean, I don't know. I think I'm one of the, like, extreme in this sort of cultural capital, but not having, like, a whole bunch of stuff thing, where I was in school for 500 years and my handbag is a $40 LL Bean camouflage zip tote, but it's very good cost per wear, and it's kind of chic, and people have complimented it. But so what? I don't think that makes me, like, better or whatever. Obviously, on some level, you know, everybody makes the aesthetic and such choices that they do feel are better, but I don't think it's better for everybody, and I don't think it makes me a better human being than somebody who spent more. You know, and I spend money on other things, like almond croissants. I spend a lot of money on those. But yeah, I guess that struck me. And what this reminded me of was actually another article that had appeared in BuzzFeed a while back about bachelorette parties in Nashville. That was, it was as much the article itself, which was by Anne Helen Peterson, as the accompanying photos by Stacey Kranitz, where it was about kind of, it like, when I remember noticing the Twitter response to this article was kind of like, it was kind of like there was this collective urge on the part of the more sort of cultural capital having readers to say, look at these women being tacky, these white ladies being tacky by other white women, okay, to be clear. But you can't say that. So it was kind of like, but isn't it problematic how they're gentrifying Nashville? Yes. Isn't it problematic how in one of these photos you see these bachelorettes passing by a homeless, also white man in Nashville with, like his sign up about, I believe, being a veteran. And these women are just walking by, not noticing. It's like there's a whole bunch of people walking by, not noticing. Is it worse when it's a bachelorette walking by, not noticing? And it seemed like there's just this kind of cultural, there's this type of article where, and just of critique in general, where it's kind of a white woman herself calling out sort of more middlebrow white women on behalf of a never quite articulated, or not necessarily not articulated, but like not necessarily relevant sort of true underdog, if that makes sense. I'm having trouble articulating this myself, but yeah, it seems like there's this kind of pattern. And I think we see this also, to turn this into slightly political topic, with like the discussions of white ladies, get your act together, coming from other white women who are sort of going to come in and educate the sort of middlebrow who might be voting for Trump or might. Yeah.
Boy, has that been a thing that emerged in the past week. That is not on our list of topics, but maybe we should talk about it anyway.
Sure. So a topic that we keep returning to is the problematic white lady and the eternal discussion of the 53% who of white women voters who maybe, although new statistics say maybe fewer than 53%, might have been 40-something% anyway, who voted for Trump. And now there's the midterm election results where it turns out that some white women are not actually social justice activists. And could that be? Apparently.
Shocking.
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, what's interesting to me about all of this is there's a statistical problem that drives me crazy, which is that this gets discussed as though it's 53% of all white women everywhere across America, came out and voted for Trump. Like, if you're walking down the street and you see a woman, there's a 1 in 2 chance that she voted for Trump, when actually it's 53% of voters. So these are not the entire population of the US. This is just who came out to.
This is true. Yeah. This is true.
And I feel like this gets lost so much, it makes me crazy.
Well, it's frustrating. There's also this thing of so I have a part of this that makes me aggravated as well, which is where white feminism, or as recently in a recent piece in The Guardian, sort of liberal women get somehow specifically blamed for this, when it's like specifically not liberal women who would have voted for Trump.
Right.
And it just seems very strange. It seems like these are different groups of people. It's not the fault of the enthusiastic Hillary supporter that Trump won, except it's very, very roundabout. It doesn't really make sense. Yeah.
I mean, certainly the votes of people who voted for Trump are not her fault. I mean, you can make an argument, and this is the thing, is that, if you want to make an impact in this way, then the productive argument is one for motivating all of the people who might have been left-leaning who didn't come out and vote to come out and vote next time. The prospect of flipping Republican women, in many cases Republican women who you don't know and who have no reason to listen to you or care what you think, who may in fact have completely different values from you, that you're going to flip them from red to blue, from Republican to Democrat, just by approaching them as a fellow white woman. That's simply not going to happen, and the fact that so many of these writers keep suggesting that it would makes me think that they've never talked to a conservative person in their entire life.
Well, we can recommend Katie Herzog's piece in The Stranger about this.
Yes, it was a great piece.
Yes. I mean, this is this eternal question of by what mechanism is this flipping supposed to happen? I think what keeps happening in these articles is there's this assumption that, like, beneath it all, every woman is a Democrat, and it's just this matter of letting her know. I am a Democrat. I'm also a white Jewish woman, which is its own thing, and it would be almost demographically strange if I were not a Democrat. I also live in Canada, so I'm sure people in like Texas really, really care what I in Toronto think. I'm like, but anyway, yeah, I don't know. This is just this sort of, it seems like the same think piece keeps getting written about like, how can it be that there are white women who are Republicans? And it just seems like, let's just establish that there are, and that the white women who are not Republicans do not have some kind of like switch that we can flip and do something about this.
Yeah. Let's just establish that. Let's just make that happen.
I mean, it's not, I might like certain things that are white lady-ish, but just because I get a matcha latte on my way to look at the probably not buy something in Lululemon doesn't mean that I have the ear of everybody else. Oh, so should we segue to another social media topic though?
Right. White, and again, it's white women, but
this is a funny one.
White women who read as ethnically ambiguous on Instagram, who are being called out for, I'm not even sure what the right word is. Is it blackface? Is it cultural appropriation?
Well, this was fascinating. So Kat found this and sent this to me, and I haven't looked into it extensively, but I saw this thread on Twitter about this, and it's a whole part of Instagram I'm not familiar with. I only use it for like pet photos and such, and like relatives' babies and things of this nature. But apparently there are white women who on Instagram read as black. Our first topic was about college age people. Then the second one was about sort of more like middle-aged or sort of young moms to middle-aged kind of people. Here we're talking about, I guess these are quite young women, right? Instagram influencers like this, it's not something you go into when you're 45, right? As a career.
I don't think so. I too am not, this is not my area of Instagram. I follow a lot of fitness accounts.
Okay. So neither of us have a clue from our own like day-to-day usage of this.
Right. It's not a problem for us to just talk about this despite.
No. I mean, I think so basically from the images that I saw from this thread, it seems like there are a few different situations that come up. It seems like there are genuinely young white women who go onto Instagram and effectively put on blackface, and it's strange. And I agree that is racist and not good. It also seems that there are white women, and as in they do different disguises, they do different sort of costumes on different days, like they are genuinely putting on a costume. Then it seems like there is a subculture, which for a million reasons I have nothing to do with, of white women who get a lot of tanning, whether it's like from a spray tan or a tanning bed or something, where they look a lot darker than a white woman who's just been in the sun a bit would look. And it doesn't seem in these cases that they're trying specifically to appear to be black, but it might look sort of the same. It also seems like there are women who are genuinely ethnically ambiguous looking, who didn't straighten their hair that day, and that is their natural hair. And as a woman who has, depending the weather, quite puffy and wavy, or if it's rainy, curly hair myself, I know that this exists. Like it's not a mystery to me. But who then seem as if they're posing as something more ethnically ambiguous than they are, simply by not doing things with their appearance. So there's also that. And then there's this question of cultural appropriation, where it's cases where a white woman has kind of given herself more of a sort of urban look than maybe she might have otherwise, and gets celebrated for this, in cases where a black woman who presented herself in the same way would be perhaps penalized for it. So it seems like there's a whole host of things.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it says something interesting about our current moment. Not just that, in at least one of these cases, that a light-skinned, platinum blonde woman can be nevertheless read as Black if she plays up her features using makeup in a certain way. I think that's interesting. But it's not just that, but also that she would choose to do that because there is value as an influencer in cultivating a more ethnically ambiguous look. That's what's considered attractive and that's what's considered beautiful. I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lot to unpack in that. And, I think it's interesting that somebody, the beauty standards are such now, at least within this kind of niche community, that there's cachet to be had in looking less white.
Well, is there, or is it only the cachet if you are white but look less white? So I think that's where some of the critique is coming in.
Oh, I don't think so, because, these are cases where the women in question are just presenting their faces. They're not claiming to be any particular ethnicity. They're not claiming to be Black and they're not claiming to be white. So basically they're presenting an image and allowing people to read it however they like.
I mean, I guess what I mean, let me maybe try to rephrase this. This is something that comes up not just recently with Instagram, but just this is sort of like a longstanding thing in fashion and beauty industries and such in general, but that a woman with sort of more typically white facial features, but with like an afro or cornrows or something like this, will have a shot at being a model or starlet or whatever, whereas a dark-skinned Black woman would have more typically Black features would have a more difficult time. And I think that that's true. I think this is something people know about. This has been, researched, not by me personally, but it's something that I think is out there and I think gets kind of at what's going on here and why. I mean, I guess the question is, why are people upset about it? And with the usual caveat of it's probably like 5 people on Twitter who are upset about it. There's not a pitchfork horde upset about this. There's a few people upset about this.
Right. I'm not sure that I agree that they're the same thing, that the same principle is in play. When it's somebody who's sort of in this influencer role, who looks, for whom there's value in playing up their features in this certain way, who could, I guess, look either way. I saw an image of one of these women without any makeup on, and she looked like, also without her hair dyed, and she looked like a white brunette with really pouty big lips. So I don't know how much I agree that we're sort of in the same territory talking about professional models versus Instagram influencers. It's like what the fashion industry will allow in versus what the hoi polloi on Instagram finds attractive. I do still think it's interesting that given the option, maybe it just says something about contemporary beauty standards that this sort of more ambiguous look is considered valuable, or at least helps you reach a wider audience.
I think that there's sort of optimistic and pessimistic ways of looking at it. That would be the more optimistic, I guess. To me, it seems like I understand, and I think this is where this kind of gets it. So I think we can maybe set aside as kind of obviously not good, like actual blackface on Instagram as its own category, something else. I'm talking about the photos that are more sort of cultural appropriation, accusation eliciting. That was really awkwardly phrased. I'm talking about when a photo elicits the accusation of cultural appropriation in terms of like accessories chosen, things like that, rather than like specifically blackface, which I think is a very different question. I think what happens is I think there is a legitimate concern about, where a white woman will be perhaps this is specific to celebrities. I don't know how much it extends to influencers because I don't really quite understand what that is. but where a white woman will be celebrated for a style choice that a Black woman, perhaps not a famous Black woman, so it also has to do with what's on Instagram versus in a magazine versus in an office, but anyway, where what a Black woman might be stigmatized for doing, like in terms of a style choice. So I think that the frustration is real and legitimate. I think the question is how this gets discussed in the culture, and sometimes it's discussed as what white people are or are not allowed to do as a style choice. And I think that's where that tends to sort of inspire backlash, when it's like each hairstyle and accessory gets kind of its own think piece, and it becomes about, it starts to seem like an etiquette guide rather than what I think would be more maybe productive is just to talk about why would somebody find it frustrating that such and such look is celebrated in what are their names, like Kylie Jenner,
yeah.
as versus So I think that I think there's a way that the way this gets discussed somehow doesn't always illuminate what's actually going on.
I remain interested in the makeup aspect of it. If a woman has ambiguous facial features, and if she makes her face up in a certain way, will be read as either Black or white, depending. Is there a moral obligation to not cultivate a look that misrepresents her? And if she does, cultivate that look, is she guilty of blackface or is she guilty of something else?
Well, so here's the question. I mean, I guess I would see this as a lot having to do with foundation, like the makeup product foundation. And I would think if a woman goes out and buys a foundation that's like many shades darker than her skin, that is blackface. To me, it seems like. But at the same time, tanning exists and apparently isn't. So I don't own foundation or know how you could even put it on in a way that it wouldn't just look kind of ridiculous if it had the wrong color for your skin. But anyway, I feel like there's a difference between foundation and okay, these references are going to be so dated, but wearing a lot of lip liner or something like that in a way that maybe wouldn't be what's done at the waspy country club.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I don't know if anybody in any subculture is doing that anymore. So I'm very 1990s way of thinking about this. I mean, I think there's a difference between different sort of style choices and specifically putting on, do you see an ambiguity in it if it's just a foundation shade that's just not the woman's skin color?
I mean, when I sort of investigated this, what I found was that in some cases, these women were choosing foundation colors that were more like the color of the rest of their skin, which is, I mean, I will say, as somebody who's really olive complected, but stays, I keep my face out of the sun because I don't want to age like an old suitcase. The skin on my body is frequently a lot darker than the skin on my face. And if I wanted to match them to each other, I would be going a couple shades darker. But, I don't know. And I don't know how much, if you are involved heavily in tanning, obviously, but also if you're trying not to tan your face because you don't want to get wrinkles, I can envision that being a way that might happen. And then there's also the fact that contouring is such a thing now. People are putting much darker shades in areas that are meant to be in shadow or, to accentuate the kind of the curves of the face. So I don't know. I'm spitballing here.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I understand why it would be annoying if you are yourself a Black woman who perhaps is trying to make it as an Instagram influencer, and then there's a white woman who makes herself up to look like a Black woman and is getting celebrated for this. I could understand the visceral annoyance at that. I also have trouble as somebody outside of the whole influencer of any race world knowing quite what was going on in each of these specific photos. And to me, it looked like some of these were that, and others of these were just like a lot of time in a tanning bed. Yeah, I don't know. It's very hard for me to know. As you can see, I'm very pale, and don't know about the tanning. So I think we should probably. I think we're ready to wrap up. You think?
Yeah, but this is going to be. This is I believe our last. Is it our last before you?
Yes, this is the last. Okay. I'm going to stand up. You can see what the issue is.
Oh my gosh.
I am enormous. Yeah, so I'm more than 8 months pregnant. And I have made it. I'm not going to give birth during blogging heads. So,
like, please promise not to do that.
Well, we're, I think I would have some sign of it at this point. So, no, but so my sort of wrapping up topic. So I'm going to be on leave, well, from work, but also from blogging heads. So Kat will be having, I believe, some other guests.
Yes, I'm going to hold down the fort.
Kat will be holding down the fort. So feminine chaos isn't going anywhere. I'm going to be too feminine, chaotic to, be on blogging heads. But yeah, so I guess my parting thoughts will be about the expectations on pregnant women in terms of food and not eating nice, tasty food, as well as this sort of expectation that sort of the pregnant women will either be sort of children, and this gets discussed a lot, like coffee is problematic, even though it's not actually medically a problem for a pregnant woman to drink a moderate amount of coffee, but it seems adult, so it's like, should she really be having coffee or whatever? But also the sort of expectation that if you're pregnant, you are going to somehow become a hippie. And I'm not much of a hippie. But these forums for women in my city are very much about everything has to be natural, and natural defined often as what I keep thinking about is there was something in this forum where it was that if your child has strep throat, what do you give the child so you don't give the child antibiotics? Well, apparently oregano oil. And I'm like, no, give the child antibiotics. Give this child antibiotics.
Horrifying.
But even in the things that aren't quite at the anti-vaxxer complete pseudoscience level, it's sort of once this was some other forum where somebody asked the question, I think just this was only for pregnant women, but it was something like, have any of you been eating anything that isn't organic ever during your pregnancy? And I remember thinking what? I mean, I try to eat fruits and vegetables, and I do, but I have not switched to I have not traded out my eyeliner for an organic one, or and then thankfully people in the comments to this were kind of yeah, we're just doing the normal stuff. Yeah. So, and then it seems like there are these options where you can be a child, you can be a hippie, or you can be a backlash person who's well, I just have, my nightly glass of wine anyway. It's I don't feel like I'm in any of these categories. I have not had alcohol. I have, however, cooked with alcohol, which apparently some people find very risky.
Ooh. The question is, have you adopted an all meat and salt diet?
So medically, I should be eating more meat. My doctor says I should eat more red meat for the iron. But I have not been very good about that. I don't really like meat very much. And yeah, so I am not on the Peterson family diet, but probably should be a little bit closer to that. Yeah. Well,
maybe we can feel a little bit guilty for having made fun of it a couple of months ago.
Well,
never mind.
I don't know. But yeah, I'm still supposed to have vegetables as well, I think. But who knows? Yeah. So that's where I'm going to be. This is going to be my first child, so I don't know what any of this is like. But and the question is how the poodle will adjust.
Right. I was going to say, probably she would object first and foremost to you describing the baby as your first child.
This is true. My first human child.
And
Okay.
with that, we will wrap it up here.
Yep.
And
nice bark for that. Yeah. Okay.
This has been Feminine Chaos.
Yes, this has. All right. Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.